Welcome to Spiritual Sessions with your host Leanne. Welcome back, my soul family. It's wonderful to have you back, and we are continuing with the Kybalion. We're on chapter 10, Polarity. So exciting, let's get into it. Chapter 10, Polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. The great Fourth Hermetic Principle, the Principle of Polarity, embodies the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites, with manifold degrees between the two extremes. The old paradoxes which have ever perplexed the minds of men are explained by an understanding of this principle. Man has always recognized something akin to this principle and has endeavored to express it by such sayings, maxims, and aphorisms as the following. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. There is a reverse side to every shield, etc., etc. The Hermetic teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled, and that thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is effected by a recognition of this principle of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this principle may be had on every hand, and from an examination into the real nature of anything. They begin by showing that spirit and matter are but the two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus, the law and laws are the two opposite poles of one thing. Likewise, principle and principles, infinite mind and finite mind. Then, passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the principle by showing that heat and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold and the highest heat. Between these two poles are many degrees of heat and cold. Call them either and you are equally correct. The higher of 2 degrees is always warmer, while the lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard. All is a matter of degree. There is no place on the thermometer where heat ceases and cold begins. It is all a matter of higher or lower vibrations. The terms high and low, which we are compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So with east and west. Travel around the world in an eastward direction, and you reach a point which is called west at your starting point, and you return from that westward point. Travel far enough north, and you will find yourself travelling south, or vice versa. Light and darkness are poles of the same thing, with many degrees between them. The musical scale is the same, starting with C. You move upward until you reach another C, and so on. The differences between the two ends of the board being the same, with many degrees between the two extremes. The scale of colour is the same, higher and lower vibrations being the only difference between high violet and low red. Large and small are relative, so are noise and quiet. Hard and soft follow the rule. Likewise, sharp and dull. Positive and negative are of two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good and the other bad, or one end good and the other evil, according to the use of the terms. A thing is less good than the thing higher in the scale, but that less good thing in turn is more good than the thing next below it, and so on. The more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. And so it is on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally regarded as things being diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, unreconcilable. But we apply the principle of polarity, we find that there is no such thing as absolute love or absolute hate, as distinguished from each other. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend, this being true no matter what point, high or low, we may start. There are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite, the two poles. And this is a fact that enables the Hermeticist to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed, that is, may have their polarity changed. Thus, love never becomes east or west, or red or violet, but it may, and often does, turn into hate. And likewise, hate may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear, and the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft. Dull things become sharp. Hot things become cold, and so on. The transmutation always being between things of the same kind of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful man. By raising his mental vibrations along the line of fear, courage, he can be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness. And likewise, the slothful man may change himself into an active, energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. The student who is familiar with the process by which the various schools of mental science, etc., produce changes in the mental states of those following their teachings, may not readily understand the principle underlying many of these changes. When, however, the principle of polarity is once grasped, and is seen that the mental changes are occasioned by a change of polarity, a sliding along the same scale, the latter is readily understood. The change is not in the nature of a transmutation of one thing into another thing entirely different, but is merely a change in degree of the same things, a vastly important difference. For instance, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc. But heat may readily be transmuted into cold, simply by lowering the vibrations. In the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable. So are fear and courage. But fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can courage be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles along which transmutation is possible. The student will readily recognize that in the mental states, as well as in the phenomena of the physical plane, the two poles may be classified as positive and negative respectively. Thus, love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non-activity, etc., etc. And it will also be noted that even to those unfamiliar with the principle of vibration, the positive pole seems to be a degree higher than that of the negative and readily dominates it. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole. In addition to the changing of the poles of one's own mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomena of mental influence in its manifold phases shows us that the principle may be extended so as to embrace the phenomena of the influence of one mind over that of another, of which so much has been written and taught of late years. When it is understood that the mental induction is possible, that is, mental states may be produced by induction from others, we can readily see how a certain rate of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person, and his polarity in that class of mental states thus changed. It is along this principle that the results of many of the mental treatments are obtained. For instance, a person is blue, melancholy, and full of fear. A mental scientist brings his own mind upon the desired vibration by his trained will, and thus obtaining the desired polarization in his own case, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction. The result being that the vibrations are raised and the person polarizes toward the positive end of the scale instead of towards the negative. And his fear and other negative emotions are transmuted to courage and similar positive mental states. A little study will show you that these mental changes are nearly all along the line of polarization, The change being one of degree rather than of kind. A knowledge of the existence of this great Hermetic principle will enable the student to better understand his own mental states and those of other people. He will see that these states are all a matter of degree, and seeing thus, he will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will to change his mental poles, and thus be master of his mental states, instead of being the servant and the slave. And by his knowledge, he will be able to aid his fellows intelligently, and by the appropriate methods, change the polarity when the same is desirable. We advise all students to familiarize themselves with this principle of polarity, for a correct understanding of the same will throw light on many different subjects. So, wonderful episode there on polarity. I apologise if my voice is a little raspy. I have a bit of a cold this last week, so apologise for that. In my last video, I'd love to thank Cloudburn-X again for commenting and giving me some tips on how he likes to enjoy content similar to this and just space out and really absorb the most from the content. So thanks so much, Cloudburn-X, for yet again getting involved with the videos, and to anybody else who does, I will be giving you a shout out because I really appreciate it. So back to the episode on polarity. Really what we were looking at is how every single emotion or thing in the universe, not even just emotion, but emotions is where you can directly see an application for this, that they come in a scale. This is the principle of polarity. So by our emotions coming in this scale, if you're feeling fear, by really going inside and learning how to transmute those emotions, you can turn that into courage. And really it's just a sliding scale so that you know when you're feeling one thing what the opposite will be. So therefore you can move towards that and transmute those energies. And when you're moving along a scale, it literally is just a slider. So it can improve the quality of your life when you learn how to do this. And then when you get, and we're all doing it all the time, that's the funny thing. I would do this with myself quite a bit. So if I feel down or upset, I will transmute my emotions into that of more positive. And really now I realise that, you can bring this all the way up the scale. These types of learnings just assist you in your life. And then there's also a part of me that thought of the other teaching that you would hear. We should experience our emotions. All emotions are a scale, and we've been given a scale of emotions for the reason to experience them. So there's nothing wrong with feeling fear or sadness or any of the emotions that may be perceived on the negative end of the scale. But the important thing is to remember is that you can transmute them, and you can work on that process, and you can bring about the transmutation quicker and move to the positive end of the scale. But certainly don't feel anything. There's nothing wrong with feeling anything on the negative end. We've been given a scale to experience it, but nobody likes to hang around that negative end too long. When you move into the positive, things just go better, and that's the truth of it. And the law of polarization is what really helps us to understand this. So really exciting stuff, and I really look forward to having you back again next week for another chapter, chapter 11, Rhythm. So stay tuned for that. Peace and love, guys. Thank you so much for watching. It's my absolute pleasure to discuss these topics with you. And if you've enjoyed today's show, please do like, comment, subscribe, and get in touch. Let me know what you like and what you'd like me to discuss next. Peace, love, and light, guys. Go out there and shine your light. Love you all.